Dear participants of the Third International Conference on Artificial Intelligence Humanities, it's my great pleasure to have honor to present you the topic Forget Being Only Smart and Start Being Bioethical, viewing pros and cons of technology use in urban settings, prepared by Amir Muzur and myself. Let me first show you a very short overview of the presentation. So in first part, I'm going to speak about city, its term, meaning, history, and some modern trends. Then I'm going to speak about smart city movement, its roots, terminology, and most famous examples. In the second part of the presentation, I'm going to open the questions of the problems of being only smart city. Finally, I'm going to conclude with a recommendation list or a plea for creating more bioethical cities. Let us first offer the definition of the city itself. If we look to the most influential theoretical approach to the city itself, then probably we will consider Louis Mumford's definition, who in his famous work from 1937 actually says that the city is a geographic plexus but also an economic organization, an institutional process, a theater, as Mumford said, of social action, and an aesthetic symbol of collective unity. So it is obvious that city itself is really interdisciplinary phenomena, including not only the history or cultural geography, but also law, politics, anthropology, sociology, demography, engineering, public health, etc., etc. So if we try to conclude it, we could say that actually city is a relatively large, dense, and a permanent settlement of socially heterogeneous individuals. This is especially true if we take a look at the percentage of the global urbanization rate from 1950s to some approximation to the 2050s. And if we look at actually the change and the amount of the people living in the cities, that actually change not only the structure of the city, but also the meaning and the purpose of living in the city itself. So if we see a city as a kind of a space, it is to say that space is always political and socially relevant, as Lefebvre said in 1974. So to confirm this argument, on the left side, you can see actually a few sketches of what we today know under the term of the ancient city, primarily characterized by its size and density and function that was primarily a fortress or a place of security for refugees in a time of war and turbulent times. However, on the right side of the slide, you can see what we today know under the term of the modern city, which is characterized not only by size and density, but also a very complex heterogeneity. And it is also some place where you can see the powerful influence of a power-driven machine technology, mass production, and a commerce and a profit. This is especially true under the term of the smart cities. Probably the biggest changes in the modern city started somewhere in the 18th century with the massive industrial revolution, especially in the field of energy, with the rise of urban population that we already previously mentioned, and with this technological impact on society itself. Somehow, if we look from nowadays standpoints, we say that actually the smart city concept, as we know it today, started back in late 1960s when the Community Analysis Bureau in Los Angeles launched a commerce program of a comprehensive analysis of the entire city. The aim of this program was to provide enough raw data material for future city strategies of various cluster analysis within urban settings. The final documents under the title The State of the City, a cluster analysis of Los Angeles from 1974 was a very famous one. It actually comprised of the different computer databases, cluster analysis, and infrared aerial photographies, which was aimed to gather data to produce reports on neighborhood demographic and housing quality, and to help direct resources to ward off blight and tackle poverty, which was very much present in the Los Angeles of that period. So that is something that from to nowadays standpoints we actually consider the prehistory and the first beginning of what we today know as a smart city concept. In the following decades, by companies such as IBM and Cisco, the term itself was coined. The aim of the term was to indicate a point of view of an idealized city connected to a topic of automation. But instead of actually creating an idealized city, it actually only introduced a more technical and more pragmatical dimension, seeing a city as a complex network of interconnected systems. So, what are the main characteristics of such city? It is the use of technology in the governance, economy, mobility, environment, people, and living. And what are actually the tools of achieving this idealized city? Those are very technical ones, such as digital cameras, sensors, transponders, meters, etc., etc. Seeing city as a real operating systems, centralized control rooms, intelligent transport system, logistic management system, smart energy grid, and building management system that can process and respond in real time to the data flow coming from the cities. So, if we look only on the pragmatic sides and financial aspects of the smart city, it could be a very positive one concept. But what are actually the hidden problems, more or less hidden under the term itself? So, even nowadays, few decades after the use of the term itself, it is still very hard to find the definition of it, but also not only the definition, but also what are actually the governing rules and the regulation of the smart city itself. If we look at the backside of the smart city, then we could say that actually it is only using data for economic growth and accordingly measuring success. So no other values are important to recognize and to value actually the development of the city. Smart, like an adjective, is adding more information, of course, and is also introducing the technological components. But we shouldn't actually forget that it is not including also the consciousness, the intelligence, or the self awareness. It is promoted as a universal, rational, and apolitical solution to address all urban challenges and as a major branding tool for urban development, or maybe a fundamental ethos to manage and govern cities of the future. So the city leaders very often are under the influences of those who offer smart city technology. But also, they are only maybe looking at the one side of this movement itself. If we also look at the recent work on the geography of the smart city phenomenon, it can show that actually the interpretation of the concept of the smart city has been filtered and proceed through very different and very specific political, economics, and cultures depending upon equally specific places, thereby actually resulting in a diverse built environment. So we could say actually the smart cities in different continents and different countries, but what would be under the terms is very different one approach. Also, if we look at the use of the technology basis in a different continents or in a different cities within the continents, then we can see that actually the technology is not equally distributed. And some cities, such as the one in Latin America, in Africa, in India, are actually far behind one in Europe or maybe North America and some Asia Pacific areas. So the technology that should be actually present here to make living standards within the city not only the smarter one but also the better one is actually introducing more inequality within the cities. what would be actually the cons of smartness? First one is the semantic one. It actually comes from that smart denotes on one hand being sharp and intelligent, and on the other being fashionable and exclusive, as Joss says in 2019. That is also the assumption that being smart is not without risk. If you are smart, then you are actually on a good side, and there is also the consequences of the lack of criticizing it. Another is actually so-called the tautology promise, when we try to define smart using actually the same explanation, such as smart city is a city with smart economy. The another level is actually the technical one that actually is trying somehow to present the modern technology of today used in smart cities as the only one and only relevant one and only smart one for the use within the cities. But technology was always in the use for improving city life. Only maybe in antiques it was the ancient roads or aqueducts, or maybe the water and steam powered machines during first industrial revolution, but it was always actually the smart one. It was always implied and used within the cities. Then actually the financial one or the economical one. The good question is maybe to ask ourselves how actually affordable resources of smart cities are to a common citizens. We can already see that actually some of the most advanced urban settings, advanced in terms of smart use, are often the most expensive and unequal one. So smart cities are showing intelligence, but we could also say that it is only the intelligence from an economic perspective. Another problem is the security one, which also includes the anonymity, the use of sensitive information, face recognition, and mental privacy who own, share, and use our data. Then the ecological one. While technologically innovative in the same way, we have to say that actually smart installation have tended to follow quite old school ecologically insensitive urban design strategies which have been causing considerable losses in terms of natural habitat and biodiversity. Unfortunately, there are so many examples of this, but you can also see, for example, the use of the coltan in Congo. There is also the problems probably of mental health, or maybe the use of the working self-driving cars, which is actually giving priority to the self-driving car instead of promoting the walking for the citizens of the city. Then the governmental one, including the decision making about data. It is all about data, and it is not about actually the real life and values of the people. More often are actually involved outside agencies and the private investors than traditional, or maybe actually what we could say, more people oriented urban planning. Then the social one, the questions, which actually say that the smart cities are unevenly distributing the benefits of the technologies, that is also the cutting working places. Finally, there is an ethical one, saying that actually we have the technology application and it is actually very hard to stop it. But so far, it is actually not followed by a legal and ethical guidelines. And it's also opening the questions of the justice, autonomy, what we have seen many times previous applications of technology. So we actually might conclude with this that smart should be an accelerator, not an aim of living in the cities. Finally, let us finish with a few recommendations. So, when we speak about smart cities, try to regulate this digital use in cities, similar to some other regulation. Good example is maybe FDA. Do not presume consent of the citizen, but maybe right to be optionated for data use, for face recognition. Try to have or to introduce the multidisciplinarity in the technological teams. Regulate the role of media. Very often, media is actually support to techno-optimistic framing. Avoid privilege and bias based on big data citizens. Instead of higher efficiency, growth, and expansion, change consumer paradigm and look for maybe alternative models. Balance needs, satisfactors, and desires, such as sustainability and recovery. Develop specific bioethical guidelines for smart cities. And maybe to conclude with the Sasson saying that if cities are part of the problems, they also need to become the part of the solution. There is huge need for involving citizens in decision making regarding all relevant services and city indicators, and that is what we call also the collaborative governments. Thank you very much for your attention.